The globalists don't govern by money. They rule by religious cults. For thousands of years, cults have been used to control populations, whether in Greece or Rome, Babylon or Egypt. Civilizations have collapsed when the irrationality of these cults have taken over like a disease. The only means of survival for the West today is to shut down these irrational cults and reassert a culture of truth as the basis for global civilization. And that's what President Trump is addressing, whether it's the mullahs in Iran or the shrine to the destruction of the West in Havana, Cuba. I'm Mike Steger, and I've been fighting to destroy these cults and reestablish the power of reason of Christian civilization for 25 years. If you want more content like this, let us know in the comments. Hit like and subscribe, and get active with Promethean Action at the link in the description. In this video, we're going to show you how Havana has been turned into the leading religious site for the destruction of Western civilization, a kind of shrine, a temple, how the State Department has identified this threat, and what a revival of a true culture of reason and truth means today for Western Christian civilization. Let's first correct the record. It was the great American system president, William McKinley, along with most of the American electorate, that freed Cuba and ended the de facto Spanish slave system in 1898. That wasn't American imperialism. It was the American spirit. Cuba gained her independence in 1902 because of American support. But following World War II, the American deep state changed American policy. Cuba became the target for a race-based, violent cult operation. The U.S. State Department under John Foster Dulles and the CIA under his brother, Allen, were at the center of Castro's revolution. In May of 1957, Fidel Castro publicly asked the United States to stop selling arms to Cuban dictator Batista. Castro was telling his supporters in Washington that he was going to restore the 1940 Constitution of Cuba. A year later, the State Department under John Foster Dulles stopped the approval for 2,000 rifles for Batista's army. 3 days later, Castro's candidate for the provisional presidency insisted on a full arms embargo. And on that same day, Batista told the United States government that without weapons, his government wouldn't last. 9 months later, on New Year's Eve, December 1958, Batista was leaving on a plane, and Castro was in power. But even earlier, in 1957, a man named Mario Urena, who wrote the public justification for the Castro Revolution, was named chairman of the New York branch of Castro's movement. But Urena was a CIA operative, a direct collaborator with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, a CIA operation to sow left-wing, anti-Christian culture under the guise of opposing Moscow. So much for Castro's credentials. A State Department and CIA coup put him in power. And the Bay of Pigs? It was just for show. Havana knew about the training camps in Guatemala. Castro was already arresting suspects 72 hours before the landing. Even Kennedy knew there was nothing clandestine about this plot. It was a plan made to fail. So why did the CIA run a revolution in Cuba? The intent would soon be clear. By January 1966, over 500 delegates from 82 countries assembled in Havana to build their new revolutionary temple, a third world organization centered in Cuba that adopted race-based armed violence as the primary means of their so-called liberation. This was a deliberate break from the 1955 nonviolent approach taken by the non-aligned movement in Bandung, Indonesia. In Cuba, the militancy of the Bolsheviks was now combined with the race-based violence of Frantz Fanon, purgative violence. The plan was to create more Vietnams, that is, drag the United States into more forever wars. Since 1966, Havana has trained drug cartels like the FARC, radical Islamic terrorists from Palestine, and sought the destruction of the United States by cultural erosion. But they also took over entire aspects of the U.S. government. The State Department's own report calls Cuban intelligence, quote, one of the most sophisticated and adept espionage and subversion operations in the world, with scores of still unidentified Cuban agents inside the U.S. government today. A former chief of counterintelligence at the CIA even said, quote, they're much better than the KGB ever was. Think about that. More sophisticated than the Soviets. Consider what 50 years of this kind of espionage looks like. But before I go on, for those of you who want more depth, content in this video is supported by a new State Department document linked in the description. And while you're at it, click like and subscribe too. Now to the espionage. Take Walter Kendall Myers. Myers was the senior intelligence analyst at the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research with top secret clearance. 30 years of espionage before ever being caught. And when he was asked, he had no regrets. Ana Belén Montes became the Defense Intelligence Agency's senior analyst on Cuba. They even called her the Queen of Cuba for 16 years before she was caught. Also, no regrets. Victor Manuel Rocha served on the White House National Security Council, was ambassador to Bolivia, and was an advisor to the commander of U.S. Southern Command. He's now serving 15 years. He said America was the enemy. Think about these positions: the State Department's Intelligence Bureau, the Defense Intelligence Agency's Cuba Desk, the National Security Council, and Southcom. This isn't spying on American policy, that's writing American policy. And not for the Cuban people, but for the new religion founded in Havana in 1966. So even more important than penetrating to the highest levels of the U.S. government, Havana was really running a cultural seminary to undermine the very fabric of American culture. As one State Department official put it in 1970, name any disturbance in the United States, on campus, in the streets, anywhere, and I'll name you the leaders of it who have been to Cuba. Thousands of American activists have made this pilgrimage to Havana since 1966. In July of 1969, the leadership of the Weather Underground flew to Havana. Within 6 months, they were bombing the Capitol, the Pentagon, and the State Department in Washington, D.C. It was weatherman Kathy Boudin who ambushed a Brinks truck in 1981 and murdered a security guard and 2 police officers. It was her son, Chesa, who later became the Soros-backed district attorney of San Francisco. But it was her father, Leonard, who was a National Lawyers Guild attorney who directly supported the Havana operation in 1966. Today, that same National Lawyers Guild says that the Antifa attack on a Texas ICE facility with rifles, body armor, explosives, and an officer shot in the neck was just, quote, a typical pro-immigrant protest. In 1995, Barack Hussein Obama launched his first ever run for political office in the living room of weathermen Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers. In 2016, Obama was the first president to pay homage in Havana after unleashing race violence throughout America's cities. All of them paid homage in Cuba. Even today's trans cultists pay homage in Havana. The Armed Queers of Salt Lake City is a member of the National Network on Cuba. In May of 2025, its members flew to Havana for the May Day Brigade. The Cubans told them, quote, now it's time for you to go home and make your own revolution. And without making any allegations, but acknowledging the clear parallels, Charlie Kirk was assassinated 5 months later by a young man with gender confusion in Utah. Do you see what's been happening? Havana became the breeding ground where anger, confusion, and frustration would become a coordinated commitment for violence and murder. Not a desire to improve the nation or build civilization, but to burn it down with blood sacrifice. If this isn't the telltale sign of a cult, then what is? But the goddess of Havana tops them all. Black nationalist Joanne Deborah Byron became the literal goddess of Havana. After changing her name to Assata Shakur, she shot New Jersey State Trooper Werner Forster in the head multiple times, at point-blank range, with his own service revolver, leaving him for dead on the roadside of the New Jersey Turnpike in May of 1973. After black nationalists broke her out of prison, she was granted asylum personally by Castro, and soon after became canonized as the Cuban saint of destruction. Generations of American activists, academics, and artists have all made the pilgrimage to visit Saint Shakur. In Chicago, there is a group called Assata's Daughters, which introduces children as young as 6 to her revolutionary politics. She is now officially one of the BLM's recognized saints. She was canonized for committing murder. There are 6-year-olds being catechized in her name. She's now a holy relic of what can only be identified as the revival of an ancient satanic cult. This is not communism or socialism. This is something far more insidious, something akin to an ancient kind of evil. It was the ancient cult of Dionysus that was known as the god of ecstasy, drugs, pleasure, and revelry, a god to escape from one's troubles. Sound familiar? Not an uncommon in a world that's becoming more chaotic. But ancient Greek patriots like Euripides knew the truth. At the end of their rituals, Dionysus's followers would tear apart a living animal with their bare hands. Captured in a play by Euripides, the main Dionysian myth ends with a delusional mother carrying her own son's severed head through the streets as a sign of conquest. And this is the intent. The intended outcome of these kinds of cults is the destruction of our young. First, you might escape, but then you lose your judgment, then your sanity, and then after supporting heinous crimes of murder, your humanity. Is it any wonder that young people today feel like they're being devoured? That the drug culture developed post-1966? And yet the young seek solace in the very culture that seeks to destroy them. This is why the Cuban leadership needs to be dismantled. It remains a serious threat to the United States as it threatens to unleash its own agents. There are also signs that the cult has begun to metastasize inside our own country. Look at the DSA, communists, and Muslim Brotherhood candidates now elected to federal office, all of which have connections to Cuba. We even have a lawyers' guild defending terrorists as peaceful protesters. Consider this. The self-described thug, Tupac Shakur, was the godson of the goddess of Havana. It makes one wonder, has the entire rap movement been anything but a massive intelligence operation? Was the legacy of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, agencies like USAID, funding these postmodern minstrel shows to create support for their cult? While globalization raised our industrial cities into ghettos, this third world culture has been creating a ghetto of the mind, and our young people are suffering the consequences. There can be no doubt that the Trump administration should take down the cult of Havana. Cutting off their funding from Venezuela was step one. The same is being done with the Ayatollahs and IRGC. All nations have these kinds of cults. It's part of the globalist regime. The difference is that Iran and Cuba have both been taken over and run by these intelligence operations for decades. The same might be said about Canada and the EU and their Mother Earth obsessions, or liberation theology in South America. But there is clearly a bigger point. These cults are not new. These are the same ancient intelligence operations that have been used since the days of Egypt and Babylon. It's why St. John equated ancient Babylon's whore of Babylon with the nature of Rome. These cults are the basis for John's apocalypse. They murdered Christians in Rome, and they are out to destroy Christian civilization today. That's their target, because Christianity achieved what no other culture ever had, a near eradication of these cults from civic life. It was Christian civilization that created a culture based on truth, on human reason, and the immortality of the human soul, a culture that created science, universal education, and became the foundation for the creation of the United States. But over the last 5 decades, as these cults have been promoted, Christianity has waned and fallen into doubt and superficiality. Christians have run to personal salvation rather than the advancement of true freedom. And these cults have once again flourished because of it. We need to eliminate these cult centers of political power, and that's what President Trump is doing. But even more so, we need to revitalize our heritage, to revive what is knowable as the highest form of human culture in human history, a culture based on principle, not race, a culture built on God's love, not man's rage, one based on the discovery of truth and freedom, not irrational states of violence and destruction. That's why we need to revive the American commitment to real progress, to rebuild our nation as a temple to truth and reason, to revive our nation's industry, our infrastructure, and our sense of beauty, so that our young people today can build a viable future for themselves and their progeny. This is what President Trump means by making America great again. These cults thrive on the irrational. They feed on the decay. They hope we react, grow frustrated, and then grow cynical, because it's our cynicism which feeds their bloodlust for violence. We win by restoring a culture of hope based on the beauty of creation, a culture once again premised on the immortality of the human soul. And that's the overview. Stay connected by hitting like and subscribe, and sign up for our newsletter in the description. As always, thanks for watching.